On a quiet evening, in a small town where people rarely noticed strangers, an old woman walked slowly down the street with a crooked stick in her hand. Her silver hair shimmered under the streetlight, and her long faded shawl fluttered with the wind. To most, she looked fragile, perhaps even lost. But there was something about her eyes, deep, warm, and almost glowing, that made anyone who looked at her pause for a moment longer than they expected. No one knew where she came from. She appeared suddenly one autumn, renting a tiny wooden house at the far end of the town, right by the woods. The house had been empty for years, thought to be too lonely and too broken down for anyone to live in. Yet within weeks of her arrival, flowers began to bloom in the garden, children were often seen laughing by her gate, and even stray animals lingered near her door as if they had found a safe place. Her name was never clearly known. Some called her Grandma, others whispered, the Forest Woman, and the children had lovingly named her Nani with the stories. What was certain was this: she had a way of making people feel seen, heard, and cared for. One cold night, when the town's electricity failed and darkness swallowed every corner, she was the only one whose home glowed with a soft golden light. Some said it was candles. Others swore they saw fireflies dancing around her windows. People were curious but strangely never afraid of her. Among the many who crossed paths with her was a young boy named Daniel. He was 12, quiet, and often carried sadness in his eyes. His father had lost his job, and his mother worked long hours at a diner, leaving Daniel alone most days. At school, he was teased for wearing the same worn-out jacket and for bringing plain sandwiches instead of shiny packed lunches. He spent afternoons wandering near the woods, wishing for a place where he could feel less invisible. One evening, as Daniel sat on a fallen log with tears in his eyes, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Crying doesn't make you weak, child. It waters the seeds of your heart." Startled, he turned to see the old woman standing with her crooked stick. She smiled gently and sat beside him, as if she had been waiting there all along. "People don't understand me," Daniel whispered. "Perhaps," she said, "because they don't yet understand themselves. But you," she tapped lightly over his chest, "you are far stronger than you think." From that day on, Daniel found himself visiting her often. She told him stories, tales of kings who learned humility, of birds who carried messages of hope, and of children who grew into heroes through kindness, not power. Strangely, whenever she spoke, Daniel could almost see the stories come alive, the flicker of wings, the glimmer of crowns, the whispers of rivers. He would blink, and they would vanish, leaving only her warm voice. But the old woman's kindness was not limited to stories. When a neighbor fell ill, food appeared quietly on their doorstep. When a stray dog limped near her house, it was seen running joyfully days later, healed and fed. When the school janitor lost his wife, the old woman spent hours sitting silently with him on a bench, saying nothing, just holding his hand. People began to wonder, how could she give so much when she seemed to have so little? One harsh winter, the town faced a terrible storm. Roads were blocked, supplies were short, and families huddled together, fearful and cold. Daniel's family had almost no food left. His father was sick in bed, and his mother was exhausted from working extra shifts. Daniel felt helpless. That night, he slipped out through the snow and ran to the old woman's house. Her windows glowed warmly. When he knocked, she opened the door as if she had been waiting for him. Without a word, she handed him a basket filled with bread, soup, and blankets. "How did you know?" Daniel asked in disbelief. The old woman simply smiled. Kindness has its own way of finding where it is most needed. The boy hugged her tightly, not realizing tears were streaming down his face. Days turned into months. The storm passed, spring returned, and the town slowly forgot the hardships. But Daniel never forgot what she had done. One summer afternoon, a rumor spread that developers wanted to cut down the forest near the old woman's house to build new roads and shops. The townspeople were divided. Many thought it was progress, while a few worried about losing the woods. The old woman said nothing, but Daniel noticed her eyes grow sadder each day. One night, Daniel decided to visit her again. She was sitting by her garden, humming softly. "Are you sad because of the forest?" he asked. She nodded gently. "The forest is more than trees, Daniel. It is a keeper of stories, of lives unseen. If it falls, something precious will be lost forever." Daniel didn't fully understand, but he felt the weight of her words. He wanted to help. The next morning, he stood in front of the town hall, his small voice trembling but determined. "If we cut the forest, we'll lose more than trees. We'll lose the heart of this town." At first, people laughed. What difference could a 12-year-old make? But then, something unexpected happened. The old woman appeared, standing quietly behind him, her hand on his shoulder. For the first time, the townspeople saw her not as a mysterious stranger but as someone who had quietly touched every one of their lives. The baker remembered the night he found fresh flour on his doorstep when his supplies ran out. The teacher recalled the time she had received a handwritten note of encouragement that kept her from quitting. The widowed janitor remembered the gentle hand that held his in silence. One by one, voices rose in support. The developers were forced to retreat, and the forest remained. That night, Daniel returned to her garden. "You saved it," he said. "No," she replied softly. "You did. Sometimes, all the world needs is one brave voice to remind others of what truly matters." For a moment, Daniel thought he saw something shimmer around her, like golden dust in the air. He blinked, and it was gone. Years passed. Daniel grew older, stronger, and kinder. The old woman, however, seemed unchanged. Her hair remained silver, her eyes warm, her presence steady. But one morning, the townspeople noticed her house was silent, her garden empty, and her windows dark. She was gone. No one saw her leave. No one knew where she went. Yet the strangest thing happened. Her house, once plain and small, now stood tall with flowers blooming brighter than ever. Birds nested by the windows, and the air around it always carried a sense of peace. Daniel, now a young man, often visited that garden. Whenever he felt lost or hopeless, he would sit by her gate, and somehow, he felt her presence, gentle, guiding, reminding him of the words she once said, "Kindness has its own way of finding where it is most needed." The old woman never returned, but the town she touched was never the same again. Neighbors helped one another more willingly. Strangers were treated with warmth. Children grew up believing that magic didn't always look like spells or wands. Sometimes, magic was simply a hand that reached out in compassion, a voice that told you stories when you felt invisible, or a basket of bread on a cold winter night. And in the heart of that small town, the memory of the magical old woman lived on, not in books or statues but in the everyday kindness people gave to one another. Daniel, who once sat crying alone in the woods, grew into a man who carried her legacy. Whenever someone was in need, he found himself remembering her smile, her words, and the way she made him feel seen, valued, and loved. The magical old woman had disappeared, but her magic remained forever in the lives she touched.